we have a notorious killer who's left a trail of bodies, death, destruction in his wake. He takes a break, a long break. We don't know why or the specific reasons how, but we can infer based on the information we learn as we follow the story. And then at some point, this notorious killer is called upon to bring forth an old version of himself after many years of living a completely different life. Does it sound familiar to you? It should. You've actually seen a version of that movie before. But I invite you to pull up a chair and let's figure out how this movie does it differently. So join me as we discuss today's film, Unforgiven. Let's talk about it. So, as I said at the top of this video, you've seen a version of this movie before, which is to say you've seen a version of a movie that has a character who comes from a violent past. And by the time we meet them at the start of the story, they're not that person. They're living a completely different life with a wife, kids, dogs, a house, and, just a comfortable life. And then at some point something happens and they have to then go back after a prolonged period of time, go back to that person. And it can be quite thrilling for us audiences to see that, because what happens invariably is this person, when we meet them, they're cordial, they're nice, they're pleasant individuals to be around, and then they're wronged somehow. And there is a certain amount of buildup that's quite significant to build, and it builds tension, I think, for us, because we want to see some justice being done. If you think of films like John Wick, that's a good example. When we meet John Wick, he's grieving the loss of his wife. And we learned obviously that he came from a pretty rough history of violence before he met his wife. So presumably his wife helped him get out of that. And obviously you've seen that movie, you know what happens. Another one, one of what I love is actually a revenge movie, Man on Fire, the Denzel Washington, Tony Scott collaboration. I love that movie. I'm a fan of that movie. But, Creasy has a similar situation. When we meet him, he's lived that life already. But he's obviously haunted by his violent past. And then, of course, he meets Peeta, and that changes things for him until he has to then go back to some dark stuff. And it's this notion of being haunted, like Creasy is, that I think I want to talk about with Unforgiven, because I think that's a huge piece of this movie. Along those lines, if I were to boil this movie down to one word, if you were to ask me, what's this movie about? And I can say it in one word, I would say it's about violence. Violence alone isn't enough to paint an accurate picture of what this movie is about. And I think if you were to zoom in a little bit to that usage of the word violence, it's about violence, but different forms of violence, the absence of violence, abstaining from it, the level of depth of violence, the multiple aspects of violence, the cost of violence. If you think about it, in a lawless time like the Old West was, it was a rough time. It was, the United States as a country was still sort of figuring things out. It still is right now. But particularly in the Old West, where you had large spaces of uncharted territory, ungoverned areas. You had people who were, deputized and voted into being sheriffs and stuff, who were on their own trying to bring order to these small towns and stuff. And meanwhile, you had a lot of people. You had a lot of bandits. You had a lot of outlaws, people who were coming in just to try to do, because you do whatever they want because they could, frankly. You didn't have the manpower to stop a whole bunch of dudes trying to do some crazy stuff. And so you had to be violent a little bit to either survive if you were on the other side, or to achieve your goal of stealing, money from the, carriages, or, robbing people, killing people, whatever. You could do whatever you want back then. So if you wanted to not be a victim, you had to resort to violence. And the movie has a lot to say about violence in that way, because unless you stayed out of trouble, abstaining from violence, avoiding violence would be kind of hard to do. The cost of violence, I want to go back to, because that's another thing that's pretty huge in this movie, and it's peppered throughout. There's a really great line of dialogue that Eastwood's William Money shares with the Schofield kid about the cost. He says, killing a man is a hell of a thing. You take everything he's got, and you take everything he's ever going to have. It's simple, but it's like, it's so profound when you think about the layers of it, because that's one way that it costs. It costs on the person, the victim, but it also, I think, particularly for William Money, it costs him too, another piece of his sanity, his soul. It's a tough business, killing someone, taking someone else's life. There's a major cost to that if you're someone with a conscience. When you know that William Money was a person who moved when he was younger, seemingly without a conscience, because he did a lot of killing. But when we meet him, he's older. He's obviously a little bit wiser. He's got a family. He's had a wife who magically cured him of his of his wickedness and evil ways, or whatever it is. And so he at this stage, he has a conscience. So he's very aware of the cost of all of his violent acts, and it's weighing on him. And something else about that I really appreciated is that the way the movie shows William Money grappling with his crimes, like he's haunted by nightmares. Gruesome details come to him of his past killings and things. And again, at least we're made to understand in the movie that it's been at least maybe 10 years, 11 years since he's last killed someone, and even last held a gun. It's one of the cool things the movie does is when the story starts, we're meeting a version of William Money who is older, maybe a little bit slower. He's not that same person. He's not as good as he used to be with a gun. He doesn't drink anymore. He's not living the life he used to live. And so he's behind the eight ball when the movie starts. And we know he's going to have to, at some point, get invested and hold a gun and do some dirty work. And we're immediately worried for him because he seems like he has no chance. There's no way he's going to win at his stage in life, the way he's moving and how haunted and kind of broken he is a little bit, like around his past and stuff. And the movie goes out of its way to multiple times show us various examples, the weight that he's holding. And even when it comes to his children, he never shies away from the fact that he did some bad stuff. He doesn't tell the kids, obviously, the details, but, he lets it be known, hey, when I was younger, I did some jacked up stuff. I thought somebody was coming for me, which is another thing in the Old West. There wasn't a lot of protection from reprisals. You commit an act and that person might have family members, and so someone's going to come. The concern is always someone's going to come after you, and don't have a family or anything of value, and you get away scot-free years later. Someone could get you. And that's the other thing this movie says about the relationship that the characters have with violence, is that it doesn't stop. I wouldn't say this movie glorifies violence. In fact, there are only maybe 3 or 4 major instances of violence in a movie that's 2 hours and 10 minutes or something like that. In fact, all the major characters we're following suffer from violence in some form. And yet the weird thing about it is that there's a odd catharsis in seeing certain violent acts play out in this movie, because again, as I said, we've seen characters wronged and the audience wants justice. And so the movie doesn't glorify violence, and yet there's a certain level of violence that's needed in order for the audience to feel like the movie works. It's weird too, because we're constantly being shown why violence isn't the way. There are countless examples in this movie where violence happens and we're seeing the consequence of it and why it would give an audience member in the same position pause before you commit the act. And at the same time, though, again, you're living in a violent time, a rough time, knowing that you may either be a victim or you would have to commit some acts, whatever it is. And as an audience member, even though by the time we see real violence taking place earnestly, the movie sort of builds to that, and the movie earns that. We're being told constantly, hey, yo, William Money's not this dude. He's not this guy anymore. And then he has to eventually become that guy again. And by that point, though, it's so late in the movie and it feels almost like it's justified in a way. So it's odd because the movie's doing two things. It's telling us, yo, violence is wrong. And it's like teasing us because we will eventually want the violence, especially when it pertains to characters we care about. If they've been hurt, we want justice for those characters. This movie has excellent production design and location. This was shot in Alberta, Canada, and it just looks beautiful with the mountain ranges. It's just such the eye candy on display in the natural world. It's just so nice. It's just like, oh man, it actually makes me sad and nostalgic for a time that I didn't live through. Something about that feels like there's so few places in the United States today that look like that. And I'm kind of sad about that there's, everything's almost overdeveloped. You're lucky you'll find pockets of places here in the States where that still have a feel of like old timey feel, particularly like some places in California, for instance, look like they're still in the Old West. Like they don't look like they've gone past maybe the 1860s through like the late 1800s, something like that. And that's kind of cool. I find myself, if I'm in those places, I find myself fantasizing about shooting a film there, like a short film, a little Western out in these places. Particularly there's a little town, Ione, California. It's developed, it's modern in it, but there's like strips of that downtown area that still look like, it looks like a Wild West set, like a movie set with like modern stuff around it. Cause certain things look like they haven't changed. You see old signs that are still there that maybe were slightly updated, but you walk up the street there and some of the buildings are like the same buildings from the 1800s. Like they didn't change the structure of the buildings. They may have like reinforced it or did some stuff on the outside of it. But if you look at the building, you can almost imagine what it looked like before the roads were there. It's really cool. So there are some places that look like, the Old West, but this movie really made me nostalgic for places like that here in the States, just visually, just being able to take in that site. I can imagine it was a perfect place for them to shoot this movie. You didn't have to suspend your disbelief too much because everything was right there. You had the natural world right there. You had some sets probably to build to make some of the convenience stores and the saloon and the brothel and all these other places to make it look like how it looked. But they really did a good job. It's a living, breathing town. The attention to detail is very good. It just feels like, oh yeah, this is the Wild West. Like you're in this town. The acting is obviously very strong. Clint Eastwood does some really strong work in this movie. And I think what I love most about this movie and Eastwood's involvement in it, because you could have just as easily had any other actor play this role. But I think the beauty and the genius of Eastwood playing it is because the audience comes to the table knowing Eastwood's pedigree, his contributions to the Western genre. And he's older at this point. This might have been his last Western. I'm not sure, but I feel like this was his last Western that he did. So you can imagine at that point, 30 years of Westerns going all the way back to the Rawhide TV show. If you just look at the trajectory from Rawhide to Unforgiven, and he's bringing the history of all of that to this movie, it's like he's spiritually playing. You can imagine a young William Money during the time when Eastwood was filming Rawhide. Years of that, and then you see him in Unforgiven, and he is a different dude. And I think it's genius that it was Eastwood. You could have had someone else, but it just works. It actually works better that it's Eastwood. It adds even more depth, more layers to this character. I've always seen Clint Eastwood as the next generation, like the descendant of the prototypical Western archetype played by John Wayne. John Wayne was, the leading Western dude during a time where the line was much clearer between what was good, what was bad. It was a different era of Western where it was very clear. John Wayne was going to be the hero, and that was it. By the time you get to Eastwood, when Eastwood was reaching his prime juice in Westerns, the line got much more blurry. The world was murkier. You went from having clearly defined heroes like the Lone Ranger, John Wayne characters, and other guys from that era to having guys who were more anti-heroes and who felt like they could go either way. They could be good or bad. That's one of the things I think is cool about this movie, because in this movie, the movie makes you think one person's the hero and you don't really know. You think Gene Hackman's character is the hero, the way it starts. And he's not a bad guy, but he's not a good guy either. And then when you meet Eastwood, because we're rooting for him because it's Clint Eastwood. He's the lead. We're going to right? He's the good guy. But the movie repeatedly tells us he's actually not the good guy. Or at least he wasn't for a lot of years. And the reason he's on this adventure now is it's a need thing. Like, he's going to get this bounty. There's bounty hunter. They're trying to get this bounty. And so Eastwood is on this journey to get some money because he's got kids to take care of. He's got a farm to run. He's got this is a livelihood thing. He's not doing it because just because like he would have done as a younger person. So it's a little bit different. So does it still make him a good guy? It depends on what side of the fence you're on. You could see him just as a father trying to provide for his family. That act is a good act, but he has to kill someone to do it. And that is maybe not so good. But look, if you're living in a world where you could die anytime somebody's killing somebody, who's to say whether it's good or bad? We know morally, because it's you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't kill somebody. But, well, you shouldn't. But out in the Old West, it's not a matter of whether you should or you shouldn't. It's just that this is what's happening or it's not. I want to segue from there to Hackman. I mentioned Gene Hackman. Gene Hackman does some fantastic work. I think he deserved to get that Academy Award he deserved to get something. Whether or not you believe in the Academy Award, still the merits of the Academy Award system, Hackman deserved to be recognized for his portrayal of Little Bill Daggett. He is a man with principles. So it seems like, this guy is good. But you see, he's very scary, actually. On one hand, he's trying to maintain order in his town. He doesn't like people like William Money. But he's not opposed to violence, which I think makes him a great foil for William Money, who for the whole movie has been really hesitant about violence. Unless he absolutely has to engage in it. Whereas Little Bill, if something's happening that he doesn't like, or if you're someone who brings to his town an energy or something about you that he's not with, like bringing a gun in his town, he doesn't approve of that. You could easily just say, we don't allow guns in this town. Give me your gun, and then I'll give it to you in the morning and you can get out of here. You don't got to beat the guy up. Violence. Little Bill is not afraid to engage in violence and go overboard. Really, he'll beat you up and he'll do too much. And you didn't necessarily do anything wrong except not follow the rules of the town or whatever it is. You don't deserve to get beat up for it. So it's an interesting conversation. Morgan Freeman and Jimmy Wolvett, those two round things out on the bounty hunter end. They're the two characters that are on this adventure with Eastwood's character on their way to try to claim the bounty. And again, it's really cool because the two of them, Morgan Freeman's character and the Schofield kid, played by the Jamie Wolvett, each of them also have their own experiences with violence. I absolutely love the women in this movie too. They have a tremendous amount of agency. I think particularly Delilah Fitzgerald and Strawberry Alice, played by Anna Thompson and Frances Fisher, respectively. Firstly, Fisher, she tears up space. She is the mother hen of the brothel that she runs, and she just spits fire in her frustration after the damage of one of her girls. Not just because it's a business loss, but it's also you get the sense that she really cares about these girls. She has real presence. You remember her. You remember the heck out of her. Anna Thompson, I think she was beautifully subtle in her performance. There's a real sweetness about just her character. It makes you just want to give her a hug. She's been through a lot. You really want to hold her. You see her on screen for just a little bit, and you instantly understand why Alice is so angry. What's cool about the women overall is that they use the power that they do have to bring about change in the world around them. This whole story starts behind the affront, the injustice committed against the woman. And the women are the ones who come up with the bounty. The women are the ones who put that out, and all these men are answering the call. But if they don't do that, nothing happens. So that's pretty cool that they were the catalyst for the story. And then lastly, one of the things I really dig how it's not about whether or not William Money lives or dies at the end of this movie, as it might be in another Western. Because the truth of the matter is he's already kind of dead. He's like half dead. The weight of his sins makes sure of that. You would think he's got kids to live for, but he's still so damaged from his past. And every death there's a consequence to every death in this movie, but also you feel that following William Money, that every death that he's been a part of, he's caused, he's carrying the consequences. You get the sense that he'll be carrying the consequences of these deaths, of all those deaths, for the rest of his life. No matter how strong the memory of his wife is, who loved him as he was and helped him become a better person, had kids with him and everything else, no matter how beautiful his children are, he's still someone who's carrying a lot of darkness, like so much darkness that the light that is around him, the light that he does have within him, is just very small. Bottom line, Unforgiven is awesome. You'll see this on a lot of lists, like best Westerns, top 10 best Westerns ever made. I'm not personally sure where I would fit it. It's definitely one of the best Westerns I've seen ever in the genre. I love that this was one of the inspirations for Logan, another movie I love, which I have to talk about on this channel. I need to now watch Shane, because I also love The Negotiator. If you've seen that movie, Shane is a huge reference point in that movie. Ever since then, I've been curious about the movie Shane. Never watched it. It might be time to get into that at some point. So as always, if you stuck around this long to the end of the video, thank you for your time. I appreciate you hanging out and talking Unforgiven with me. I'm getting out of here. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.